All right, so now we're in the summary and recap portion of this ridiculous video. I'm just going to basically go through the entire video's content and offer slightly more in-depth responses. Well, not really more in-depth. It's not going to be long. I'm going to summarize my responses to his various questions that atheists cannot answer, basically answering them again. Because the first part of the video was my immediate reactions to those questions, and some of my answers will be very similar here in the summary. But I've also went back and watched the video, wrote down each question this guy asked, and went a little bit further with my explanations. So from the top, how did existence emerge out of no space and no time? Anybody should be able to obviously spot that that's a personal incredulity type of argumentation. He doesn't understand this. How did? If you got the how did part in any question, it's going to commit the logical fallacy of argument from personal incredulity and ignorance. And for this particular question, nobody knows how this actually happened. But there are naturalistic hypotheses that well explain this. And they explain it better than the unfounded supernatural ones. How can an atheist assume that his atheism is valid when the moment of the start of existence is stark proof on the creativity of the creator and his ability to originate existence? Now that's a loaded question, isn't it? It's kind of a question begging, poisoning the well. Atheists do not assume atheism is valid. They are in that obligate condition due to a lack of convincing evidence. It's not an assumption. The Big Bang is not necessarily the start of existence itself anyways. Some other meta-existence could preclude the start of our local universe, like a multiverse, or the singularity itself may have always existed prior to spontaneously erupting into our universe. In any case, we have no evidence whatsoever that there was ever a state of non-existence. Something may have always existed because existence may just be a brute fact. There may be no way to have non-existence. And we have no way of demonstrating any of this. This is all hypothesis and conjecture, which is the same as his response would be. Hypothesis and conjecture. I'm appealing to naturalistic causes because that's all we know of, and he'd be appealing to a magical cause, supernatural cause. Finally, there cannot be proof of creativity. This isn't proof of creativity, as he asserts. As if the universe were designed for humans. The creator must be a moron if that's the case, given the absolute majority of the universe is entirely hostile to our existence. And our existence is entirely irrelevant to the existence of the vast rest of the universe. It's like, why would you create a snow globe the size of a concert hall just to have one bucket in the middle of that concert hall that contains a goldfish? It's entirely irrelevant. It's a circular argument that presumes a creator could exist to serve as the explanation, and is basically playing God of the gaps. A typical logical fallacy that theists love to engage in but never seem to understand is illogical. It's fallacious. Okay, question B. You notice how many questions there were in question A? Anyways, question B. How did no life transform into life? How did? Obviously an argument from personal incredulity or ignorance. Lacking an explanation doesn't make magic more probable or even a potential explanation. The supernatural hasn't been demonstrated to be a mechanism that can explain anything. It's just inserted where we don't have an answer. But in this case, how did matter mutate from lifelessness into living cell? That's how he worded it, by the way. Matter didn't mutate. Living cells are still matter. But the process by which inorganic matter becomes organic, and then organic matter becomes a protocell, and then a protocell becomes a more complex living cell, is subject of research in an area called abiogenesis. It is not impossible to explain with purely naturalistic causes, and so far all of the evidence points to a naturalistic pathway. No evidence of the supernatural even exists to make it a potential explanation. It says, with all of our techniques and advancements, we cannot, till this very moment, originate the simplest form of life. So how can we explain the origination of life in the dead matter? Again, it's a how-to. How can? Well, if we don't have that explanation, what does that mean? We just don't know. That's all it means. It's not evidence for his proposal. Our inability to artificially do something doesn't mean it cannot happen naturally. They're two different things. You got us doing stuff artificially, and then the natural pathways that it actually went through. It is irrelevant that we cannot reproduce this ourselves. We also can't reproduce a planet via technology, an entire planet. That doesn't make planets any less natural or negate the natural pathway that leads to planetary formation. Our technology isn't at some pinnacle that we should be able to do all this stuff by now. But it gets worse because this very next statement is, wouldn't we have been at least able to originate a life form that supersedes the one originated in the dead matter by at least 1,000,000 times? Not only is that an ill-formed question, just poorly structured, but it basically asserts that we should be able to do this now if it was at all possible. That's just simply not demonstrably the case. We may not have the ability to do this now, but that doesn't mean we won't be able to do it in the future. And in any case, it's still irrelevant to whether or not we can do this. And whether we can do this is irrelevant to whether it can happen naturally. Question C. How can the atheist argue against the annihilation of all mankind? What is the rational, substantial, and scientific evidence that an atheist can present to prove that annihilation of all mankind is a mistake? As life forms, we prefer to be alive over being dead. That's just how being alive manifests. We can have a vested interest in preserving our life because we see being alive as beneficial. Thus, we form societies with rules that better ensure our preservation and perpetuation. We perceive value in continuing to exist and thus do that. Like any other life form, those that don't have a vested interest in survival or perpetuating their existence tend to die off. Thus, we are an example of a social species that did value remaining alive. This is simply natural to do so. That's just how it works. Okay, his next statement. The material world knows no right and wrong. That's just a bald assertion. He says, so annihilation of mankind must be equal to keeping them alive from their perspective. No. From our perspective, continuing to exist is valued as we are conscious thinking life forms that enjoy remaining alive. Right and wrong are not mere opinions. It is a fact that for life forms, life is generally preferable to death. That is simply an objective, demonstrable truth. Whether or not you look at a mouse, a tree, or a more aware species like humans or other apes, they tend to want to remain alive, and they'll fight to do so. Okay, so now we're on to question D. Atheism assumes that human beings are just animals who came into existence after a long and slow sequence of evolution from meaner beings. Whatever the hell that means. False. That's just a bold assertion about what atheism assumes. And there's no assumption here. Humans are by definition animals. Genetics alone proves common ancestry, and evolution has been demonstrated at the micro and macro level. Demonstrated and observed. It's an observed and confirmed fact that we are animals that came into existence after a long and slow sequence of evolution. I just don't understand why these are still issues for these people. So he goes on to ask a question that doesn't seem to follow from that. So what if a higher being came into existence? Will it have the right to put us all in cages and use us as lab rats? The Darwinist answer to that we derive from matter is yes. What? Rights are enforced and exerted and extended by thinking agents. If, say, a extraterrestrial species comes along and comes to Earth and starts locking us up in cages to do experiments on us, that will certainly suck. But it is not a matter of rights. It is an unfortunate situation we would fight to avoid. Just as a cat might fight being confined in one of those carrier cages to transport them, or being stuck with a needle, we too would fight to avoid becoming lab animals of a higher species, whatever the hell that means. It has nothing to do with rights. So what's the purpose from protecting mankind or providing them with meaning or purpose when it comes to atheism? So again, another ill-defined question. But the purpose mankind derives for itself has nothing to do with atheism. Atheism is just the lack of belief in gods. Meaning and purpose are derived by other means. Our purpose for protecting our own species is that we value our own existence. We have been conditioned to do this, because we are rational social animals. It is in our direct benefit, our vested interest, to value our own and to protect ourselves from negative situations. Even if that situation might ultimately render our efforts futile, such as, if a sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial comes along and enslaves us. We tend to not do this to ourselves because a society that treats people with equity, with equality, tends to be better for everyone involved by definition. Oppression is a negative experience by definition. Thus, not oppressing is superior to oppressing. This is just an objective truth humans have discovered, albeit quite recently, as slavery used to be the norm. These questions in no way make supernatural answers even more plausible solutions or even possible solutions. In fact, per Islamic and Judeo-Christian theology, there is a superior entity to which humans are otherwise enslaved, with meaning only defined by that being and completely subordinate to that being. Your actual meaning for life is defined by this higher being. If anyone is promoting an ultimately meaningless existence, it is the theist, not the atheist. Atheism here is unable to explain the reality of man. I love that statement of his. Atheism doesn't explain anything. It is just a response to the claim, does a God exist? It offers no explanation because it is just the answer, I don't believe that. That's all it is. It's not meant to explain anything. Any explanation you're going to get from facts, from studying the science of it, or, rational discourse. You're not going to get it from atheism. So, question E. What if, according to evolution, we prove that one race is higher than the other? It's a meaningless question and exposes his vast misunderstanding of evolution. Race is a meaningless social construct, ultimately an assertion of fundamental differences based on superficial variations. We're all human. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, Hispanic. It's the race thing is really just a way of dividing people up based upon slight variations that occur due to geographic and genetic isolation. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make you higher or lower. The whole higher and lower thing in evolution is pretty much meaningless. He goes on, will the higher race be entitled to transform the lesser race into used matter, as we do with lesser insects and animals? Again, the Darwinist answer is yes. No, there's no way to quantify higher or lower regarding race per evolution, as we are still the same species. And evolution, just the theory of evolution, doesn't tell you what you should do or should not do. It's not an ethical thing. It's just an explanation of why there is variation among species, why there is a diversity of species on this planet, why changes happen. Using people is inherently immoral if it is against their will, because forcing anyone to do something against their will is a negative experience for them by definition. That makes it objectively bad by definition. If you are interested in not having a society where bad things happen, negative experiences happen, you don't oppress people. Whether you have a evolution-based argument for superiority or not. Valuing the well-being of humans over lesser animals is by necessity, as we have to eat to survive. So yes, we're going to oppress the cows because we eat them. Now, veganism might actually be morally virtuous because they avoid that, because they think of those animals as thinking agents that don't want to die. But as a necessity, we have to eat. So we're going to oppress other life forms at some level. I mean, ultimately, we are all part of a food chain. There is nothing immoral about a shark trying to eat me any more than it is immoral for me to try to eat the shark. The subject is not even in the realm of morality, ultimately. It is just the way animals survive. They have to consume other proteins from other animals, or at least from other life forms. But as a social species that has to share space with others of our same species, it is in our best interest not to do this to our own people. We don't go around killing people to eat them. As a society that results from valuing well-being of other humans is by definition beneficial to all humans in that society. I mean, this is just an objective fact that we've observed by getting better with our understanding of sociology. Okay, see here. His next statement. This very argument is enough to obliterate atheism from the mind that utilizes common sense, since the only criteria to judge who is better than who is the criterion of God-fearingness, not by color or strength. So it's still bigotry. It's still, judging better or lesser. You're still making humans into different categories of better or lesser instead of seeing them all as equal. He was taught that that's a good criteria, when there's no demonstration that a God even exists, let alone any way to quantify or evaluate who in fact actually fears God in the correct way, such that you could just make that distinction and be a bigot and say that, oh, these ones don't fear it correctly, let's put them to death or whatever. This is entirely an arbitrary criteria that is invented by religions for the sole purpose of oppressing those with alternate views, a mechanism in place to promote the survival of that religion. It has nothing to do with facts or truth. God-fearingness has never been an indicator of who is better than who. And even making that statement appeals to the subjective evaluation based on a circular argument. Okay. Question F. Atheists argue that morals are relative, meaning can be seen from more than one perspective. No. Not all atheists argue for relative morality. That's just not a fact. I argue for an objective morality based on the facts of human interaction and valuing well-being as, by definition, beneficial to our existence. So, no, atheists do not argue that morals are relative. Not all of them. He goes on to say, so honesty can be better than betrayal, or betrayal can be better in some cases. And that doesn't really have anything to do with relative morality at all. That's just a situational ethics issue. Plus, this is not even a true dichotomy. The opposite of honesty is dishonesty, not betrayal. And there may very well be situations where a lie might be more humane and cause less harm than telling the truth. But generally, truth is superior to falsehoods because accurate information lends to practical application far more often than inaccurate information. He goes on to say, yet when confronted with their own trials, they claim outright that morality is objective and that things like honesty or betrayal are absolute. False. Those atheists that do not argue for subjective and relative morality do not claim morals are objective in any sense. I mean, you have atheists that argue for relative morality. They're not going to say that morality is objective. You're going to have atheists like me that do argue for an objective morality, and I'm not going to ever say it's subjective. And I will say it is objective. So again, he's painting with a broad brush here. And this has nothing at all to do with atheism, since atheism is just the claim that no gods exist and has no moral pronouncements. Your morals have to come from somewhere else, like humanism, Buddhism. You're going to have philosophies that inform your morality. He goes, because if morals are relative, then immorality makes no sense, since we will never be able to set a line between morality and immorality. Well, yeah, that is why I have objective morality. That's why I derive my morality based on well-being, so I can have an objective basis, so I can draw that very clear line based on what promotes or detracts from well-being. The facts of what promotes well-being or causes harm are demonstrable and objective. That which promotes well-being or decreases harm is moral. That which detracts from well-being or causes harm is immoral. This is very simple and objective. And you have to evaluate each situation because sometimes you get in the weeds. Sometimes there's a little bit of a subtlety to it, some nuance. But in general, if you avoid harm and try to ensure well-being, you're being moral. Because it's beneficial, because it's good by definition. He goes, this is definitely a clear contradiction, because if morality was objective and absolute, then this law of morality must have had a lawgiver, the will of Allah, and divine accountability. Again, it's a bold assertion. It's also a non sequitur. I have already exposed and explained how morality can be objective. The lawgiver is just the facts about social interactions, sociological interactions. The truth about what causes or doesn't cause harm requires no God to understand. It just requires observing the effects and determining the consequences of actions do or do not cause harm, or do or do not promote well-being. You can observe these things. Divine accountability, by the way, he brought that up. The threat of hell versus the reward of heaven. That's not even moral. That's immoral. It doesn't actually use morality. This is just people having a selfish interest of avoiding eternal torment versus getting a reward for their actions. This is a primitive concept to base dictates upon, not a moral system at all. I mean, if the only reason I am not raping someone is to avoid being held accountable and punished, I am not exercising morality at all. If, on the other hand, I am not raping because I have a healthy sense of empathy and do not want to harm someone because that is a net negative, I am basing my interaction not on a threat, but on a compassionate understanding that my society is better if people don't rape or cause harm in general. That's the society I want to live in. I want to live in the one where people don't have things done to them against their will, because I'm in that society and I don't want things done to me against my will. He goes, if morality was relative, then no atheist must complain from immorality or even comprehend its concept. Again, another ill-formed phrase. And perhaps that's true if morality was relative, but it is not relative. Not if you value well-being. There are objective truths about what leads to a beneficial society, and valuing well-being sets up a foundation upon which morality cannot be relative, as there are truths regarding well-being that are objectively demonstrable and observable. Okay, question G. How did the amazing constants of physics emerge? How did? Again, that's argument from ignorance, personal incredulity. Again, all of these constants entail very intricate differences that must never vary, even by the slightest or minutest fraction, or the whole universe would collapse. That's a bold assertion. And it's also false. The constants could be different, and we could still survive in the universe that results therefrom. The constants could be very different, and we would not be in that universe in the first place. Thus, it is no surprise that we find ourselves in a universe compatible with our existence. The universe will undergo heat death eventually anyway, so whether it collapses or just freezes, humans are only temporarily compatible with the universe that we inhabit. He goes, for instance, if the cosmological constant is fine-tuned, the cosmological constant is fine-tuned to 120 decimal places. Bullshit! And even if it was 1 decimal or more or less, the whole universe would collapse. He has no idea what he's talking about. The fine-tuning argument has already been repeatedly demonstrated to be flawed at the very foundation. But the cosmological constant defines whether or not the universe would eventually collapse, reach a state of equilibrium, and stop expanding altogether, or expand forever, leading to a heat death, which is what we currently think is going to happen. That's what our observations have told us, is that the expansion is actually speeding up, and the universe will eventually just fly apart, and we won't be able to survive. Not even atoms will be able to survive. But even if the cosmological constant were such that the universe would collapse, there's no reason that we couldn't still be here and just have to face that inevitable doom billions of years from now. It doesn't define when it should collapse. And, they had models where the universe was expected to Big Bang and then reach a certain state and gravity would cause it to contract and collapse. And that might lead to another Big Bang. There's this reciprocal concept of the universe that we don't really think is the case now because we think the universe is going to expand forever. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean that we can't be in that universe and that it's only temporarily compatible with us. He goes, this precision proves the accuracy of a great maker, noting that the constants are numerous in physics and all of them are intricately precise. No, it doesn't prove that at all. It proves that we are in the universe that is compatible with our existence. That's all it proves. If the universe were much different, perhaps we couldn't exist, but we wouldn't be around talking about it. Now, if the constants seem to be incompatible with our existence, if we found ourselves in a universe where the constants made it look like we shouldn't be here, that would be pretty damn miraculous. But finding ourselves in a universe compatible with our existence is no more surprising than the fact that water precisely fits the hole that contains it. Good old analogy. Let's see here. Question 8. How did the genome emerge within living cells? How did? Argument from ignorance, personal inability. Again. He goes, a code must require a coder, and this genome designates what each cell will be used for. Technically, no. Doesn't this prove that there is a unique maker dictating the very specific codes? No, not at all. Natural selection explains this quite adequately without inventing an imaginary invisible programmer. The emergence of a molecule that can do beneficial things to an organism is explained by various processes in the study of abiogenesis. It isn't even an unknown. This is something we actually have figured out pretty well. But let's just say we had no explanation for DNA or RNA. What is the evidence that a God exists or that a God tinkered with those molecules to make them do what they do? Again, he still doesn't present evidence for his claim. He's just inserting God into that gap. Did this God also ensure that the transcription process wasn't perfect such that variations can be accumulated by descendants, i.e. the obvious observed basis for evolution itself? Did this God ensure that the code would indicate a shared common ancestor for every living organism? Did this God include the possibility that the code could replicate so imperfectly that genetic diseases and disorders would also occur? And these are things we've observed. And if he's proposing a God's involved in this at any level, those things must have also been intended, right? In any case, this is not proof of a designer. The observed facts of genetics is direct and observable proof of evolution. Also, the fact that RNA and DNA exist is proof that not all sequences that could be interpreted as codes requires a conscious entity to produce them. You got naturally produced codes and unnaturally or human-produced codes. You still got that distinction there. He hasn't demonstrated that this one is also a consciously produced code. Let's see here. Question I. Where did morality and values come from when it comes to atheism? Another ill-formed question. Atheists get their morality by evaluating consequences and situations with respect to harm and well-being. Some of us do anyways. Some atheists are also more relativists. Atheism itself has nothing to do with morality. He goes on to say, atheism sees the universe as a tumultuous sea of atoms that make no sense and have no purpose, which was one of the driving motives to immorality and depravity. That's false. It's a non sequitur. And because atheism doesn't see anything, it's a label for a position on the God claim, one of disbelief. That's all it is. And anyone that looks at the universe would see that it's a tumultuous sea of atoms, to a certain extent. But that doesn't mean it makes no sense and has no purpose. The universe does make sense. We have discovered ways to understand it, including the purpose of certain structures to make other structures and things of that sort. Thus, it has to make sense. We can come up with physical laws and theories. Thus, it has to make sense. If it didn't make sense, none of that would be even possible. And none of that's driving force for immorality and depravity in the first place. What drives immorality and depravity is a lack of properly functioning empathy abilities, tied often to a poorly functioning frontal lobe or some other cause. I mean, what drives immorality and depravity is the absence of valuing well-being, which to me is a flaw in logic, as valuing well-being is beneficial to yourself and everyone by definition. Another driving force for immorality and depravity is religion. It conditions people to evaluate who is better or worse based on God-fearingness, as he put it, thus providing ample justification for the oppression and killing of non-believers, as the Quran actually permits. It gives you that mechanism for separating better and worse and giving you that justification that these people are lesser. Whereas my worldview, one based on humanism, is that humans are all worthy of the same level of respect until such time as they demonstrate they're not worthy. But in general, I want to treat everybody the same. I don't want to judge them to be better or worse just based on a condition of their beliefs, like this guy would. He goes on to say, but since morality does exist, then atheism is invalid. And that's just a non sequitur. It makes no sense. I could just as easily say that since morality does exist, theism is invalid. I could use the exact same argument. There's precisely the same validity to that argument. There's no validity to either argument, just to be clear. The fact that atheists can be moral without appealing to divine authority or worrying about that fear of hell and the reward of heaven is proof that his assertion is baseless and actually false. We have morality. We don't believe in your God. You know, it's a proof that his assertion is false. It's not a proof that atheism is valid. Atheism is only valid to the extent that we haven't been presented with evidence that a God exists, which he presented none in this video. Absolutely none. It was all just gap filling with this guy, and bald assertions, and non sequiturs that make no sense. Anyhow, thanks for watching. I apologize if that seemed a bit long. My videos tend to be a little bit long. I'm trying to work on that to make them at least more entertaining if they're going to be long. And I'm trying to cut down on my content in that regard. But in any case, you can see just another set of questions, even ones that are complicated and seem deep, are still ultimately vapid at helping the theists demonstrate the truth of their proposition. And all they can do is attack our proposition, our rejection of their proposition, I should say. Anyhow, thanks for watching. Have a good night.